Welcome. For those of you who don't know me, I'm David, Jack's oldest son. On behalf of Teddy, my brother Lee, my sister Cicely, myself, our wives, and Jack's grandchildren, we thank you for attending this service of remembrance. Before we start, I also want to thank my brother and sister for co-coordinating the slideshow of Dad, which you just saw as you entered the chapel. It will also be shown at the end of this service. Dad, as was his style, provided a very rough outline of how this service should be conducted. He wanted it to be held in a non-denominational chapel. We figured out it was this place. And we also wanted two songs to be played. One, Morning is Broken, you just heard, and the other, The Rose, you will hear at the end of our gathering. With that as our guide, he left the rest up to Teddy, my siblings, and me. In his, quote, retirement, unquote, Dad wrote several books, mostly fiction, but two in particular were very close to him. They're up here next to his urn. Wait a second. I lost my spot. Dad wrote a book of poems with his brother Dick, several of which you will hear today. During COVID lockdown, Dad undertook an exercise in which he wrote a series of life stories, 52 in all, excerpts of which all will be read today. These books, plus a lifetime of memories and stories, some of which will be shared today by Jack's dear friend Alf Brandin, my brother, and myself, help create a treasure chest of recollections, which we hope capture Dad's many facets and unique personality, whose loss has left a giant hole in all of our hearts. Once our planned part of the service is completed, we have left time for those of you who would like to share a brief memory of Jack to do so, which will be started by Teddy. After the services, as Dad requested, we will be hosting a celebration of life at the Harbor Point Strawberry. We hope to see you there and have a chance to speak with each of you more about the incredible husband, father, father-in-law, grandfather, friend Jack was to all of us.
Hello, I am Catherine Kate Wilson Summers. I'm Jack's oldest grandchild and the mother of Jack's great-grandchild, Connor, a very joyful little 3-year-old who I spoke to this morning. And he actually said, "I miss Big Papa." So that's how I started my day. So we're all gonna get through this. I had the pleasure of, when I was 25, moving out here to San Francisco, and thankfully to Teddy and Jack having a landing pad when I decided to change my life. And a few years later, I had the joy of adopting their sweet terrier, sometimes terrierist, Scruffy, who I had for another 12 years, and he just passed a few months ago at 16. So Jack's wise words have shaped my life, and now, as my dad mentioned, we're lucky enough to have this book that he has a collection of his memories from. It's this service called Storyworth, and every week he was emailed a prompt chosen by Lee and the immediate family. And it was everything from questions like, what was your first boss like? Or what was the hardest time in your life that you're willing to share? What got you through it? And what did you learn from it? Yes, we cheated sometimes and had Jack answer more than one question at a time. Sometimes he chose not to answer the question and picked his own topic. But true to form, he approached the project with great gusto, crafting thoughtful, detailed responses that we now all get to cherish and read. And at the end of the year, those 52 essays were bound and put into a book. And so now I'm gonna read one that he wrote called What Makes You Happy? If I can find my place in the book. Okay. What makes you happy? Happiness is such an elastic concept. It is an addition to an otherwise static state, as in the infusion of an intense feeling, or is it the absence of Or is it the absence of or pain? Or is it a static state itself, the absence of feeling or emotion? Or, most likely, is it all three, depending on the psychic makeup of each individual and the circumstances in which this person is situated? I'll not pursue this inquiry further, but rather respond in a few particular ways. First, I'm now happier than I've ever been in my life. That happiness can be described as contentment. Content with my marriage to Teddy, with my home, with my circumstances, with myself. I'm happy and confident inside my own skin. Before, while I had much to bring me joy, there was always an undercurrent of anxiety. I was always restless, wondering about the paths I had chosen in life. Now I recognize how lucky I was to have found a wife, funny, clever, unpredictable, loving, angry, and plucky, a career that suited me, and wonderful children. I'm also happy with what I've accomplished in life. It may not be much in the grand scheme of things, but I'm grateful that I could do well in school and have a useful and productive career. I remember sitting as a student in the Mercerburg Chapel and hearing that to those to whom much has been given, much is expected. I tried to live a life not to make money, but within the limits of my own personality and ability, to be useful to others. And I ended up in a lovely condominium with a view of San Francisco Bay, fulfilling the prophecy of an inner voice while I was shoveling snow once in Concord that I would end my days in California. The stunning beauty of nature brings me happiness. It doesn't have to be one thing. It can be mountains or a rolling sea or a quiet lake, a beautiful chapel, or even the dry, flat landscape of northern Nigeria and the profusion of brilliant flowers seen through the windows of our thatched roof house. I also appreciate and am moved by acts of kindness, of a mother's love for a child, of children scampering on a playground, of our little dog licking Teddy's face. You don't have to search out these incidents. They come unbidden every day. And lastly, I take joy in communion. I'm always happy in the company of family and friends. At the beach in Hyannisport, sitting on a porch at Idaho, bicycling with my children to the North Bridge, or in a roar about the dinner table. I've been astonishingly lucky to have born into a loving family, to have a wonderful brother, to enjoy each of my children in their unique ways, my grandchildren, and I'll add, and my great-grandchild, and diverse nieces and nephews. Moreover, it amazes me that I could have accumulated throughout my life such an abundance of truly interesting and able friends. Many are gone now, but it sure was fun being with them while it lasted. Thank you.
Good morning. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Alf Brandin, a classmate of Jack's at Harvard Law School, where we first met and became close friends. It was a friendship that lasted 65 years. My wife Ann and I were newly married when I arrived at Harvard Law School. This is going to be exciting. I was newly married when we arrived at Harvard Law School in the fall of 1959. Jack and Betsy had been married longer and had 2 young sons at that time. There weren't many married students in our entering class, and soon several of us who brought bag lunches with us found ourselves around a table in Harkness Commons at noontime commiserating about the Socratic method of teaching to which we had been subjected. That's the lunch table at which I first met Jack. And Jack and I shared, we found, a common sense of humor, we'd say irreverent and self-deprecating, and soon became friends. And one winter day, as I recall, Jack at the table had mentioned that he would like to find someone to play squash with, and he asked me if I played. I told him I'd never heard of the game. And Jack, realizing that he had a pigeon in hand, Said he had an extra racket and he would teach me. And so, after lunch and before an afternoon of studying, we made our way over to Hemingway Gym squash courts, and Jack patiently taught me how to play squash. In the beginning, we played once or twice a week, but as I became more proficient, we played more games and we played longer. And we certainly agreed it beat studying. After our first year, Ann and I moved to a larger apartment and we needed some furnishings. Jack said they had an extra rug that they weren't using and he would give it to us. He suggested we come over for dinner and meet Betsy and pick the rug up. And we did that. And Ann and Betsy hit it off immediately. And over the next 2 years, the Wilsons and the Brandins spent a good deal of time together. We became fast friends. Indeed, Jack is a godfather to our son, Christopher. After law school, we lived on opposite sides of the country, but we kept in contact and visited from time to time. Several years after graduation, Ann and I tacked a week onto a summer Army Reserve duty I had at the Pentagon, and we traveled up to Concord to visit the Wilsons. Jack was building a fence around their side yard patio at the time, and I arrived in time to, of course, be of great help to him. And we spent several days completing the project in a week that was the hottest, most humid week of the summer. And when we finished the project, Jack dubbed it Fort Pitt, as in armpit. And during the latter part of the 60s, in the midst of the counterculture revolution or movement and Summer of Love in San Francisco, Jack, who was then the assistant dean of admissions at Harvard, convinced the admissions office that a recruiting trip to the West Coast would be in order. And he gallantly volunteered to do it himself, personally. And we were living in San Francisco at the time, and Jack and Betsy stayed with us for the better part of a week. And we took them sightseeing. Carol Doda's topless, bottomless performance at the Condor. The Jefferson Airplane at the Fillmore Auditorium. Strolling through a haze of marijuana smoke in the Haight-Ashbury. And watching the hippies cavorting in Golden Gate Park. I mean, what else is there to see in San Francisco? I remember particularly our family visit in 1972 to Ilaho, an island off the coast of Maine, where the Wilsons were vacationing and Betsy was recovering from her cancer operation. It was a bucolic setting. We stayed in a huge old summer house overlooking the water. We roamed the island, taking picnic lunches with us. We played tennis on a faded dirt court with poorly strung rackets. Jack took us sailing around the harbor and down the thoroughfare. And in the evenings, we sang songs and we ate lobster and huckleberry pie. In 1982, shortly after Jack had completed his sabbatical year teaching in Nigeria, he was recruited to become the dean of the Golden Gate University Law School in San Francisco. Jack and Betsy had separated by that time, and he needed to find a place to live. We had a small cottage behind our house in Ross, and Jack stayed there for a month or so while he was in transition. And one morning, a few days after Jack settled in, he presented Ann with a list of items that he felt would make his stay more comfortable. Things like Kleenex, a type of soap he preferred, those sorts of things. Apparently, he had gotten used to being waited on in Nigeria. Anne glanced at the list, folded it, ripped it up. Smiling, she handed it back to Jack and suggested that these were things he could probably get for himself. Jack did find lodgings, eventually settling into a condominium at Harbor Point, which is where the reception will be held following this service. It was during that time that he met and we got to know Teddy. Jack and I interacted professionally while he was at Golden Gate Law School. Jack inherited a faculty that tended to emphasize cultural and societal issues and therefore attracted a somewhat diffuse and unfocused student body. The result of which, Golden Gate Law School was in danger of losing its ABA accreditation because of the low bar examination pass rate of its graduates. Jack introduced a more rigorous curriculum and raised admission standards, but not without blowback from some of the liberal alumni and faculty who objected to being being asked what to teach, and were concerned about the financial implications of admitting fewer students. To help deal with these issues, Jack put together a visiting committee of senior partners of a number of well-regarded San Francisco law firms to become sufficiently acquainted with the law school to enable them to critique the changes being made, offering suggestions as appropriate, to help with financial issues, and to consider academically qualified students for possible summer employment as interns or permanent employment. Jack asked me to join the visiting committee, which I did. And over the next year or so, the committee succeeded in giving Jack the support he desired in order to implement the necessary changes. Because of his efforts, Jack not only raised the bar examination pass rate of the graduates, thus assuring the accreditation of the law school, but he also raised the profile of the Golden Gate Law School in the greater Bay Area legal community. Well, as Anne would say, Alf, you've talked long enough. Let me conclude by simply saying that Jack and I continued in retirement to enjoy each other's company, often having lunch together, most recently on the patio at Via Casitas a month ago. Although Jack and I tried, we never succeeded in solving any of the world's problems we discussed. But we certainly had a lot of laughs together over that time. I'm going to miss him.
Hi everyone. I'm going to hold the microphone because I'm a little quieter. But my name's Ivy. I'm one of Jack's 3 grandchildren. I'm joined by my cousin Kate and my brother Peter. And I'll save my stories for later. But today I'll be reading from a book of poems that my grandpa and my great uncle Dick wrote together. It's called Dreams from Spring into Autumn. And this poem is titled Old Charlie by Jack Wilson. So Charlie's dead, is he? That crusty son of a bitch. He didn't scare easily, that was sure, and his itch to say what he believed, salty, unvarnished, profane, proves the truth, once considered, is better uttered plain. I wonder what the place is like without his thoughtful care. A house gets to wear a face, like the people living there. He was a weathered, old, and tough, but he was decent too, and kind. He'd seen heaven and hell enough to last most of mankind. The red carpet in the hall that covers every inch of floor will miss his slow footfall when closing the stout oaken door. With its scrolled wrought iron lock, he'd go to check the time of day on the old grandfather clock, and pause and shuffle on his way.
Thank you all for being here. I'm Jack's middle child, Lee, and it's just wonderful to see all the people who knew him. One of the big parts of my father's life was the fact that he was a twin. And my brother's going to expand on this later, but we reached out to our uncle, Dick, and asked him, he was unable to travel out here because of his own health issues, but we asked him to write something for us that we could share at the service. And Dick did something we weren't expecting. He actually sent us excerpts from 3 of my father's poems that spoke to him. So you're going to hear a little bit more of my father's poetry right now. And I'll also read the note that Dick included with that. But these are Dick's words to share with all of us today. Throughout our lives, Jack and I often mirrored each other without realizing. In midlife, we found out we both wrote poems. The following words are from 3 poems by Jack, which express my feelings. The first poem is titled Voyagers, and these are just excerpts from these poems, not the full poems. The voyagers put out to sea in shallow craft with goatskin sails, far out beyond the farthest lee. The second poem is called Beyond the Chasm of Eternity. Beyond the sunset they may be, say plaintive songs and sea folk tales. Beyond the chasm of eternity, unbridged by ecstasy of thought, lies the riddle broken. And the final poem is titled Beyond. Spun out, far down and wide, through whirling orbs and galaxies, I drift upon a timeless tide of memories and fantasies to where I burst with knowing, gorged by the ordered flowing of a universe of restless law. I wept before in sightless awe.
Just want to follow up on my family's appreciation for everyone who can make it here today. As you've already seen the other grandchildren, I'm Peter. I'm Jack's grandson through Lee, who just spoke, along with my sibling Ivy and my cousin Catherine. What I'm reading today, believe it or not, is not a poem written by Jack. We found this poem when we were going through a folder. We found a folder that was just filled with articles, photos that he'd collected throughout his life, and this was found at the very top, hand-typed and copied. It's by C.P. Cavafy. He's a Greek poet from the 20th century. It's called Ithaka. It's named after the final goal of the Odyssey, one of the longest and oldest journeys in fiction. As you set out for Ithaca, hope your journey is a long one, full of adventure, full of discovery. Lastrygonians, Cyclops, angry Poseidon. Do not fear them. You will not meet such things on your journey, so long as a rare excitement stirs your spirit. Lastrygonians, Cyclops, wild Poseidon. You will not confront them. unless you bring them with you in your soul. Hope that your road is long, and may there be many summer mornings when with what pleasure, what joy, you enter harbors you see for the first time. May you stop at Phoenician trading stations to buy rare things, and may you visit Egyptian cities to learn and keep on learning from their scholars. Keep Ithaka always in your mind, for she is your final, ultimate destination. But don't hurry the journey. Better it lasts for many years. So you grow old by the time you reach the island, wealthy with all you've gained along the way, not expecting Ithaka to make you rich, for Ithaka gave you the marvelous journey. Without her, you would have never set forth at all. She has nothing more to give you now, but if you find her poor, Ithaka has not deceived you. So wise will you have become, so full of experience, you will understand what Ithaka means. I'll share my thoughts later, but thank you all.
Boy, do I miss Dad. I thank my brother, sister, and Teddy for giving me the opportunity to eulogize him. I know they miss him too, maybe even more than I. His unique, self-effacing personality, friendly disposition, quest for adventure, brilliance, and kind heart are gone as each day breaks, the loss compounds. No words I can write or speak will ever fully capture Dad. I will attempt my best in the words that follow. Starting with his birth, the concept of duality carried through Dad's life. Certainly one of the very first things one learned about Dad upon meeting him was him being a twin. Not just a twin, but an identical twin. So identical that well into their adulthood, he and his brother, my Uncle Dick, took great pleasure in swapping clothing and tricking their mother, my grandma, on who she was talking to. There are no words to describe the relationship between Dad and Uncle Dick. What is closer than close? They both loved life and embraced all it had to give. While they didn't live parallel lives, their lives were very close. Both became very successful academics. Both loved jokes, puns, and having a good time. Both had 2 wives. The similarities are amazing when you think about it. They are world travelers, both together and individually. They made friends around the world and then shared their friendships with each other. I suspect many of you here today became friends with my Uncle Dick through my dad. There are numerous other instances of duality in Dad's life. I'm going to briefly discuss how duality impacted his domicile, career, mobility, marriage, and spirituality. Dad lived on each coast. He was an Easterner who lived in California. Growing up and after attending college in New Jersey, a tour in the Navy, and attending Harvard Law School, Dad initially settled in Concord, Massachusetts. He became fully integrated into the Concord community with a circle of friends and active involved in the Board of Assessors, community chest, and social circle. Then, at the start of middle age, he accepted the offer to become, from Golden Gate University, to become dean of its law school. And he moved to California, where he developed another cadre of close friends and ended up living for the next 43 years. Dad was a lawyer and an artist, a combination not normally associated with each other. I never really understood why Dad went to Harvard Law School. Once he graduated, it quickly became apparent he didn't like the practice of law, but he did like the study of it. He also, as he got older, embraced being an arbitration board member to the Financial Institute Regulatory Authority, a role he filled for 23 years, well into his 80s. Typically, Dad was the impartial third party on a 3-member board. I think his ability to view both sides of an argument and weigh the merits of each was enhanced by his being an artist who looked at the world to what it was and what it could be. Dad's artwork was never sold, but freely given. I know the walls of Teddy, Lee, Cicely, and my houses have several of Dad's drawings and paintings on them. Charcoal and ink drawings, like those in your program, littered our house in Concord. His art transitioned over time from charcoal to ink, then ink to watercolors, and then watercolors alone. In my admittedly biased opinion, he was a rather good artist. The paintings out here in the foyer are from him, and you can make your own judgment after the service. As a young man, Dad was very athletic. I remember Dad playing and playing well: tennis, squash, touch football, and basketball. Then later in life, he became dependent on a walker to move. It is unique that one can specify when Dad's fragility started. Dad, Lee, and I were in an amusement park on a ride that the more you shifted weight back and forth, the higher you went. And just as we were about to get to roll over the top, Dad stopped and uttered what became famous words: "Boys, boys, my back, my back." Lee and I ended up carrying Dad out of the park. While Dad may have been down, he did not stay there and worked from that point on to get his back stronger and maintaining his independence. He continued to play tennis for many years thereafter. Dad had 2 wives, who he loved very much. He married my mother, Betsy, at age 22. I was born when he was 23. 15 months later, my brother Lee came along, and then 6 years after that, along came Cicely. He was a great husband and father. We lived, in retrospect, an idealistic, middle-class American life. In his early 40s, fractures in my parents' marriage emerged. Despite acknowledgement of great love for each other, they agreed living with each other was no longer possible, and Dad's move to California was alone. Living in California, Dad met Teddy, and after moving in together in their 60s, he called me one day to say he and she had married. Teddy was the perfect companion for Dad. She understood his relationship with my mom, supported Dad as he aged and became more infirm. And as his loyal travel companion, they explored Asia, Antarctica, almost. The storm stopped the boat from getting down there. He took some great pictures, though. Northern Europe, and yearly trips to Zahualtneo, Mexico, and traveled by train around the USA. As an interesting side note, Mom and Teddy became fast friends. As Mom was dying, her last words to Teddy were, "He's yours. Good luck." A week after Dad's death, Teddy said to me, "Jack and Betsy are looking down and laughing at all of us trying to prepare for this service." Truer words were probably never spoken. Dad was extremely lucky to have these 2 extraordinary women in his life. Dad was spiritual, but did not attend church. While I was growing up, he attended Episcopal church, as he had done prior to moving to Concord. It was mandatory at Mercersburg Academy in Princeton. While the church and his teachings spoke to him, he couldn't fully embrace the foundations of the Episcopal faith, and he started to explore options. He ends up without a church, but a firm belief in a higher being, and that the lessons of the church that he largely followed were important. In my last call with Dad, just before he died, days before he died, he asked about my grandson, his great-grandson, attending church. An interesting comment from a man who hadn't attended church for many, many years. One last example of Dad's duality, his relationship with money. He loved to save a penny until he saw a map or a painting that he liked, and then the wallet opened. Stories of Dad's either joking or not, I was never sure, telling me and Lee that we had $1 for a McDonald's dinner, or the glee he had in finding a cheap but good quality wine are legendary. I should add that when he returned home from the hospital under hospice care, one of the first things he said was, "Time to buy the good wine." Okay, enough about Dad's duality. Suffice it to say, he was a complicated man who was constantly seeking to understanding of the world around him. I want to also discuss his friendships and legacy. Dad had friends around the world. When I sent out his obituary, which to be honest, he wrote large parts of, I was floored by the number of responses from Australia, New Zealand, Spain, Hong Kong, and of course the United States. Dad would go on a cruise or travel to some new place and make lifelong friends who he maintained contact with, genuinely wanting to learn about their lives, their opinions, not just during their initial meetup, but also as their lives progressed. Dad's friendships were lifelong. I got many responses to this obituary notice that contained words like, I met Jack at our first year in Mercersburg, his prep school, Princeton, the Navy, or Harvard, and how much they enjoyed maintaining contact and when their travels allowed, to meet up with him over the years. As if to highlight these comments, yesterday I received an email that read in part, living across the hall in 79 dorm at Princeton, from Jack and Dick, yes, they were suite mates, was a highlight of the senior year. Nothing was more fun than dropping by that room in the afternoon or evening to discuss everything and nothing. I've never known bull sessions like those since then. I'm glad that we were able to have a few more recent gatherings with the Wilsons and once with Jack and Teddy in California. Not quite the same, but all good nonetheless. I will miss him. He worked to make new friends while at Spyglass. He was an active participant in his Square's happy hour, looking forward to conversation and interaction with his neighbors. In Concord, he became a member of the Concord Social Circle, the oldest men's club in the United States. From that experience, he learned the value of men discussing issues of the day, and then when he moved to California, he sought out to become a member of a men's group that had the very original name of Men's Group. He maintained friendships with members of the social circle and men's groups when he could no longer attend, either due to distance or health. Dad was a friend to everyone, but especially his family, brother, children, spouse, daughters, in-law, nieces, nephews, grandchildren, and great-grandchild. He actively maintained contact through our lives and served as the town crier for rapid sharing of family news. I still mourn that I didn't have the letter he wrote me at summer camp. It was a classic. In addition to sharing family news, Dad had hand-drawn a picture representing a camper. I don't remember much, but there was a roll of toilet paper in the back pocket. Great humor for a 10-year-old boy. As technology matured and Dad moved from the written letter to email and finally on to FaceTime, every weekend he would reach out to Uncle Dick, Lee, Cicely, and myself with a FaceTime call. The calls went something like this. Hi, David, what's new? Not much. Dad, what's new with you? Not much. We would then proceed to talk for 30 to 40 minutes. I miss those calls about not much. Dad's legacy is difficult to enunciate. Certainly the facts of his life are captured in his writings, and his art provides lasting reminders of his talents. But more important was the underlying moral compass he followed, and the passing along by example to all, especially his family. His parents immigrated to the USA just prior to and during World War I. Products of both the Victorian and Edwardian eras of the British Empire, they installed in Dad qualities which the British esteem, such as charm, compassion, wit, warmth, sensitivity, self-awareness, humility, honor, and grace. The result was a stoic, competitive, moral man of tremendous ability who never, well, almost never, beat his own drum. I didn't learn he graduated with honors from Princeton until his obituary. Throughout his life, these qualities were the foundation of his strong work ethic, commitment to intellectual rigor, and curiosity. This rare combination of early 20th century British values, coupled with a very American life, resulted in a man who people gravitated to and was an instigator of irreverent laughter at any gathering. The words instigator of irreverent laughter are Dad's. He knew who he was, liked who he was, and didn't present a false impression or abide others who did. I can't close this eulogy without talking about laughter. Laughter was the foundational to Dad the person. Almost every note I received back from Dad's obituary mentioned laughing. Dad, in his book of life stories, was asked, "What is your favorite joke?" Not surprisingly, he couldn't answer. Instead, the answer he did provide said, "The few I remember are mostly the kind not printable in this response." My humor tends to be of the one-liner variety, woven into other speech. Lines like, "German humor is no laughing matter," appeal to me. Puns and clever words appeal to me. I suspect his words resonate with all of you. His humor generated others to engage in humorous repartee. The result, conversation with Dad, always had an element of humor. This wraps up my eulogy to Dad, your friend Jack. I hope I have captured the tapestry that was his life and its impact on all of us. We will now open the microphone for any of you who would like to say a few words about Jack and your remembrances of him. We will start with Teddy. Brian will be passing the microphone around to you.
Thank you also to the Wilson family for such a beautiful ceremony. Jack was a wonderful rascal, and his final words to me were, as I was taking the dog out for a walk, and I told him I'd be right back, was, "I love you, kitty." And with that, it sums it up. He was a very special person. I think of him as a very special rascal, never knowing what that fine line. So thank you.
My name is Jim Duckworth. Jack, Jack was one of my oldest and dearest friends. And when I called one of our other friends to let him know about Jack's passing, he said, "Oh, I think everybody in this room believes." He said, I really love that man." You've heard about the men's group. That's when I first met Jack about 40 years ago. It had started about 10 years prior to that, and it's still going on, although we're losing members right and left, but we'll see. Jack and I immediately bonded over a common experience. We had both attended law school. He went to Harvard, I went to Stanford, and as he would tell me frequently, you couldn't get into Harvard. That's why you wound up, at the second-rate school. But the experience that really brought us together was we both hated law school. It was just a terrible experience. Hopefully things have changed by now, but in those days it was like Marine boot camp. And the professors were just terribly vicious in trying to weed out the weaker members of the class. And by the time we graduated in both schools, the class was much smaller than when it started. So right away, Jack and I knew that we were kindred spirits. Jack was an incredibly humble person. For a man of his accomplishments, it took years and years of friendship before I ever even learned that he was dean of several law schools. He was an inspiration to everybody that knew him. We traveled together one time. Teddy and Jack were talking at an event that we were at, and they were telling me that in about 3 weeks they were going to East Asia, and they were going to Vietnam. And I said, "Oh my God, I've always wanted to go to Vietnam." My wife and I had traveled all over the world. I'd never been to Vietnam, and Roberta had no interest in going. So they said, well, you know, why don't you come with us? And I said, oh, I couldn't do that. You know, it's your trip, and my passport's expired, and you're leaving in 2 or 3 weeks. And no, they insisted that we go. So I ran around and got an expedited passport and went with them. There's the 3 of us. And we loved Vietnam. It was just wonderful. When we got to the Viet Cong tunnels that are under Saigon, Jack and I were all ready to crawl in them, and they were only a meter wide and a meter high. And Teddy said, I'm not going down there. Jack and I were very adventurous, and so we started crawling through these tunnels, and they were so narrow that you couldn't pass one person or another, and there were just the 2 of us. There didn't seem to be anybody else at the time, and there was a light bulb every 100 feet or so. And Jack, being the trickster that he is, he was in front of me, and every 100 feet or so it would open up to a big room, which they used as a sleeping room or a men's kitchen or something. But Jack, about halfway through these narrow tunnels, stopped and said, gee, I don't think I can go any further. And I said, Jack, you know, we can't back up, and I can't get around you. And Jack said, well, Jim, I guess this is it, you know? Well, of course, he was teasing, and of course we went further. And later that week, it turned out, and this again is a sign of his humility, he knew the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Vietnam, who was also the ambassador to the UN. And he said, oh, by the way, he said, we're invited to lunch. And so the 3 of us went to lunch there. There was this big compound, walled compound with a lot of servants walking back and forth. And whenever they walked by the Chief Justice, they would bow. And I thought that was very, very fancy. When I got back home, I told my wife, Roberta, I said, I think we need servants that when they walk by will bow to us also. That sounds really great. She said, well, then you better get back to Vietnam. So Jack will be greatly missed. He was a wonderful friend and was really one of a kind.
I knew Jack pretty much basically since I was born. I mean, I've lived at Spyglass for 17 years. I gotta say, the greatest moment I think I've ever known Jack is when I used to do dog walking late at night for Henry. When I'd come to drop off Henry, usually I'd chit-chat with Jack for a good, I'd say 20 or 30, 40 minutes. And I gotta say, those were the funniest times I've ever spent with Jack. They were wonderful. I don't really remember what they were about, but I know they were something special, and man, I'm gonna miss them.
Hi, I'm Kate. I live upstairs from Teddy and Jack, and I moved in 5 years ago, so I have been privileged to know both of them. Absolutely lovely people, loving, friendly, caring, accepting. Teddy has just been terrific. Jack was terrific, and everyone here has already mentioned, many people have mentioned how humble Jack is, and I can tell you that that is the case from my own experience. I was his medical advocate when he was having trouble getting the correct care from his pulmonologist. So I took him to the pulmonologist, and I kind of set the pulmonologist straight. And those of you who know me will understand what that means. And I said, and by the way, this gentleman in front of you is not just an 89-year-old, or whatever he was at the time, 88. I said, he was the assistant dean of the Harvard Law School. Well, you should have seen that doctor sit up. And afterwards, Jack said to
friend and mentor of mine, but of also my dog Bella, who would cuddle up to him, and he became almost like her father. And Henry, of course, was her boyfriend, so that was, you know, it was pretty close. Anyway, but I'm thinking that now Perry's will go out of business because when I used to go over there on Sundays and watch football, Jack's order of a prime rib sandwich and sweet potato fries would, that will eternally live on even though he's not, and I will sorely miss him.
Yes, my name is Alan. I'm a neighbor on Spyglass. I've known Jack for many years, obviously. All I can say about this gentleman, he was a scholar as well. Okay, and we all miss his sense of humor. Last time I saw Jack, he was in a gurney in the ambulance coming home, and I said, Jack, how do you feel? He said, great. He gave me a thumbs up also, and well, unfortunately, he passed away. So we will all miss him. He was a great man.
Thanks. I got to know Jack a little bit in the few years that I've been at Spyglass, and we had started a dialogue about a lot of research that I had done over the past 30 years into the nature of the afterlife. This is scientific research in that direction. And Jack was fascinated with it and wanted to hear more about it. I attended his men's group one day and did a presentation on the book that I had written on the subject, and was very warmly received. Toward the end of Jack's life, just within the last month or so before he passed, I had promised him, which he had wanted me to spend some time with him. And I had promised to do this, and I made arrangements to do that for the day after he passed, as it turned out. So we never got to have that final dialogue. But from the research that I've done and all of the people that I've met in this field, I trust that Jack is with us today and appreciates the love and the friendship that's here for him. Thank you.
Hi, I am Andrew. I am one of his caregivers. I am so honored to be his caregiver over a year. And the last time I met him before he passed away, 3 days before he passed away. And I said, Jack, can I pray with you? And he said, yes. And I prayed with him. And after I prayed with him, and he looked at me and he spoke the Lord prayer. He said, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth like heaven. And I said, wow, that's really sweet. But the thing I remember Jack a lot, when I became his caregiver, he's so organized, okay? One time, okay, he told me every day when I had him to take a shower and got to change, okay, the pants and the t-shirt, and he organized. He hand the pants and the t-shirt from the right to the left, and you got to pick up the one in the right. You cannot pick up in the middle, okay? And one day, I just want to get the one in the middle, and he told me, you didn't pick the right one. And I said, wow, that's so touched. But I love Jack, and I know all of you love him. He's a wonderful man. He's a man really kind, really love, and all I want to say is life is too short, right? And the Bible says our lives it looked like the flower. In the morning, that blossom, but in the evening, that fake and that fair. Okay, and I do believe, he in heaven now, and someday all of us, okay, 100 years from now, all of us will be gone too. Okay, where do we go? Up to heaven or down? That we invite Jesus in, come to our lives, right? Okay, God bless all of you. Thank you.
So I didn't know Jack very well. I met him a couple of times, but I know his family very well. And what really strikes me in this moment, in this ceremony, is the extent to which you can tell so much about him from the people who spent the most time with him, who loved him. Their compassion, their kindness, and their sly humor.
Brian, I think Peter would like to say something.
Well, the last time I saw Jack was unfortunately the last time. It wasn't originally planned like that. I was planning to see him middle of July, just before he was on hospice, and we just picked a date, and the day I showed up was second to last. I remember arriving 2 hours late, well, technically 6 hours late because of a changed flight, and we got there, he was in bed, he was very comfortable, and wasn't much for conversation at that point. He was still having some trouble breathing, but he was always a man taking journeys. He took one last journey from the bed to the couch. He was watching TV, and I was holding his hand, and I just remember looking at him, and I said, "You look happy." And he said very knowingly with a laugh, "I am happy." I really liked that. I'm going to be thinking about that for a while.
Hi everyone, me again. I think a lot of folks have talked about how one of Jack's superpowers was in small talk and conversation, and I think he really excelled at that around the dinner table. I think that was one of his comfy places, and it's where he was able to let a lot of exchanges of ideas and introductions happen. That's how I met Teddy over a meal. That's when he didn't have as much energy. The thing he would choose to do was have meals together. And something that I keep thinking about is the way he was able to let down kind of the defenses of everybody he was eating with, and especially his children, my aunt, my uncle, and my dad. And I think that's kind of the gift of those generations that have a gap in between each other, is that they're able to let you see the kids that the people who raised you were. And despite everybody becoming very responsible, mature adults, all bets were off around the dinner table. And I think that's something that takes a lot of tender care and consideration going into. So I'm really grateful for that.
Hi, I'm Leslie. I am wife to Lee and mother to wonderful Ivy and Peter. And Jack was just such a lovely father to me and such an amazing grandfather to my children. And he gave us so many gifts over the years. Often when the kids were little, at Christmas time, he would give us gifts with the loudest sound that required batteries. But he also gave my kids, with Betsy, the gift of summer camp, which was a really meaningful time for them. And I want to just share a couple of quick memories. I remember once Jack was visiting us in Bellingham, Washington, and I picked the kids up from school, and they had a friend in the car that we were giving a ride home to, and they said, "Is Grandpa Jack here yet?" And I said, "No, not yet, but we'll see him at dinner." And they were explaining to their friend that their grandfather was the funniest grandfather ever. And he certainly was, because how many grandfathers give their children several fart machines over the years. And at age 90, I believe it was age 90, Jack flew by himself from the Bay Area to our home in Bellingham, Washington, to spend the new year with us. And seeing him on our doorstep coming up the stairs just brought tears to my eyes that he would make that journey. And it was always just a wonderful time, and we were able to all gather once again in Bellingham in April to celebrate Jack's birthday and Cicely's and Ivy's, and just had a lovely dinner. And then one last memory, Lee and I were here the week before he passed, and Jack was in the hospital, and we were getting ready to go, and we were saying goodbye, and he just held Lee's hand, and he said, "My wonderful boy," and we all just had this lovely moment together, and I just feel incredibly blessed that he was such a fierce, loyal family member to so many of us and friend to so many, and I just feel my life is so blessed to have known him for so many years.
Thank you for your comments. Lee, you want to start setting up for the post-service thing, and I will, while he's busy back there beavering on getting cords connected, I'm going to stall and give you a few words that I've written down. But on behalf of Teddy, my brother Lee, my sister Cicely, Jack's grandchildren, Kate, Ivy, and Peter, I want to thank all of you for attending this service of remembrance for my dad, and I want to thank you for your comments also. We look forward to further remembering Dad with you during the reception that follows at Mill Valley Lighthouse Restaurant. Parking is limited at the restaurant. Fortunately, there is no tennis tournament scheduled this weekend, which should open up more parking. Street parking is also available. My dad loved root beer floats, and in honor of this, they will be served at the reception. We look forward to meeting each of you there. Now, in accordance with Dad's desires, we will close out this service with the song "The Rose" by Bette Midler.
You don't need to stay for the whole slideshow.
Put the microphone by that machine on the back.